I didn't chase the wrong dream. That's what makes this confession uncomfortable. I chased a good one. Respectable. Understandable. Easy to explain in a single sentence. It wasn't forced on me. No one dragged me into it. I stepped into it willingly, smiling, even proud. It just wasn't mine. I didn't realize that at first. In the beginning, it felt like direction. Like relief. When you follow a dream that already has a clear shape, you don't have to ask difficult questions. You don't have to invent meaning from nothing. The path is laid out. The milestones are known. The approval is almost guaranteed. All you have to do is walk. I told myself that wanting clarity instead of chaos was maturity. That choosing something proven was wisdom, not fear. And maybe it was, at the time. The problem is that borrowed dreams don't announce themselves as borrowed. They feel like opportunity. I remember the early days clearly. The sense of progress. The compliments. The reassuring feeling that I was on track. People around me recognized the direction immediately. They understood it. They supported it. They admired it. That approval felt grounding. I didn't ask myself whether I was excited. Excitement felt optional. Secondary. What mattered was momentum. I learned quickly how to measure my worth by external markers. Progress. Validation. Recognition. Each achievement reinforced the idea that I was doing something right. And maybe I was. Just not for myself. I didn't notice the subtle trade I was making. Every time I ignored a quiet doubt, I replaced it with reassurance from someone else. Every time a question surfaced, I answered it with logic instead of listening. Logic is convincing. It can justify almost anything. Over time, I stopped asking what I wanted altogether. The dream I was living already had answers. It didn't need my input. That was the appeal. I didn't feel trapped. I felt carried. Years passed like that. Not painfully. Not dramatically. Smoothly. I became good at this life. Efficient. Competent. People began to associate me with the role I was playing. I was dependable. Predictable. Successful by the standards that mattered. Inside, something else was happening. Not dissatisfaction. Distance. I felt like I was narrating my own life instead of experiencing it. I could explain every choice, but I couldn't feel the reason behind them anymore. I told myself this was normal. That passion fades. That adulthood is about responsibility, not enthusiasm. I believed that. Until one small moment unsettled everything. I was asked a simple question. If you could start over, would you choose the same path? The answer came out immediately. Yes. Too quickly. I didn't even check with myself first. The speed of that answer scared me. Because it didn't come from certainty. It came from habit. I realized I had learned how to defend this dream instinctively. As if it needed protection. That night, alone, I tried something unfamiliar. I asked myself a question without allowing logic to interrupt. Whose dream is this, really? The silence that followed was heavy. I thought about where the idea had come from. Who had praised it first? Who had benefited from it? I realized something uncomfortable. This dream had always made sense to others before it made sense to me. Parents. Teachers. Society. Peers. It fit a narrative they recognized. I fit inside it. That's not nothing. But fitting is not the same as belonging. I started replaying moments I had ignored. Times I felt a pull towards something less impressive but more alive. Times I dismissed curiosity because it didn't align with the plan. Times I felt restless and blamed myself for ingratitude. I wasn't ungrateful. I was misaligned. The realization didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with grief. Grief for a version of myself that never got to choose freely. That never explored without justification. I had mistaken permission for desire. I had chosen a dream because it was allowed. Because it was applauded. Because it came with instructions. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped noticing that my own voice was missing from the equation. I didn't hate my life. That was the hardest part. There was no villain. No catastrophe. Just a quiet truth forming beneath the surface. I wasn't living a bad dream. I was living someone else's. And calling it my life. Once I named it, someone else's dream, it stopped feeling abstract. It became personal. Every success carried a strange aftertaste. Every compliment landed, then faded. Every milestone felt earned, and oddly empty. I tried to push that feeling away. After all, this life had given me stability. Respect. A sense of direction when others felt lost. Who was I to question that? Questioning felt ungrateful. I told myself that doubt was a luxury problem. That many people would be happy to trade places with me. That discomfort was simply the price of responsibility. So I doubled down. I worked harder. I leaned further into the role. I told myself meaning would follow effort. But meaning doesn't arrive on command. The more I committed to the dream, the more distant I felt from myself. I began to notice how carefully I curated my reactions. How quickly I shut down impulses that didn't align with the plan. How often I reframed curiosity as distraction. How instinctively I defended choices I no longer felt connected to. I wasn't lying to others. I was editing myself. That editing became exhausting. There were moments, quiet, unremarkable ones, when I felt a sharp resentment toward my own life. Not because it was cruel. Because it was polite. It asked nothing dangerous of me. It rewarded compliance. It didn't require me to risk being misunderstood. And that safety began to feel suffocating. I felt guilty for wanting more. Not more success, more truth. I told myself that wanting something different meant rejecting everything I had been given. That it meant disappointing people who believed in me. People who had invested time, pride, and expectations into my path. That guilt kept me obedient. I didn't want to be the person who throws away a good life. I didn't want to look ungrateful. Or confused. Or irresponsible. So I stayed. And staying slowly taught me how to disappear inside achievement. I stopped feeling proud of things I accomplished. I felt relieved instead, as if each success postponed a reckoning. That scared me. Success shouldn't feel like delay. I started imagining what would happen if I continued like this. Not a dramatic collapse. Just continuation. More progress. More praise. More distance. I saw myself years later, still competent, still respected, still quietly disconnected. No disaster. Just absence. That image felt unbearable. I realized something painful then. Following someone else's dream doesn't just misalign you. It trains you to mistrust your own desires. I had learned to ask, does this make sense? Before asking, does this feel alive? Sense had replaced instinct. Approval had replaced curiosity. I began to see how early this pattern had formed. How often I had been rewarded for choosing what was expected. How rarely I had been asked what I wanted without conditions. Over time, I internalized those expectations. I became my own gatekeeper. I didn't need external pressure anymore. I was enforcing the dream from the inside. That realization broke something open. I wasn't trapped by circumstances. I was loyal to an identity that no longer fit. The moral dilemma surfaced clearly then. If I stayed, would continue living a life that made sense, while slowly losing the ability to feel at home in it. If I left, I would have to face disappointment. Confusion. Possibly regret. Leaving would mean admitting that I had chosen well, but not wisely for myself. That felt like failure. And yet, staying felt like betrayal. Not of others. Of myself. I began to understand why people cling to lives that don't fit. It's not fear of change. It's fear of invalidating the past. If I chose differently now, what did that say about all the years before? That question haunted me. I didn't want to believe those years were wasted. But staying just to justify them felt wrong. I realized then that the past doesn't ask to be justified. It asks to be integrated. I could honor the years I spent living this dream without continuing it forever. That thought frightened me. Because it meant responsibility shifted back to me. No more scripts. No more inherited definitions of success. Just choice. And choice is heavier than permission. I started noticing how often my body resisted things my mind defended. Tightness before meetings. Relief when plans were cancelled. A strange calm when I imagined letting go. Those signals were subtle, but consistent. I had ignored them for years. Now they felt impossible to dismiss. I realized that living someone else's dream hadn't ruined my life. But it had muted it. And the longer I stayed, the harder it became to hear myself at all. The question was no longer whether I could continue. I could. The question was whether I should. And whether continuing, just to preserve a narrative, was worth the cost of my own presence. That was the moment the dream began to crack. Not dramatically. Quietly. From the inside. Letting go of someone else's dream didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like disobedience. Not toward people, toward a story that had shaped my entire sense of worth. For a long time, that story told me who I was supposed to be. What counted as success? What made a life respectable? Stepping outside of it felt like stepping into nothing. No applause. No clear markers. No guarantee that what replaced it would be better. Just uncertainty. The first thing I lost wasn't stability. It was certainty. I no longer knew how to introduce myself without referencing the role I had been playing. I no longer had an easy answer to questions about direction or goals. That silence was terrifying. But it was also honest. I stopped defending the dream. Not publicly, internally. I stopped arguing with myself about why it still made sense. Stopped reframing discomfort as immaturity. Stopped pretending that logic could replace resonance. The absence of justification felt like standing without a script. Some people noticed the change immediately. Others didn't. A few tried to reassure me. You've worked so hard for this. You're almost there. It would be a shame to waste it. They meant well. But I finally understood something. Leaving a dream doesn't mean it was wrong. It means it was finished. I wasn't rejecting everything it gave me. I was refusing to let it define the rest of my life. That distinction mattered. I grieved the identity I was shedding. Not because it was false, but because it had been useful. It protected me. It gave me structure. It earned me respect. But it also asked me to stay predictable. To stay legible. To stay inside limits I no longer believed in. Letting go felt like loss. And it was. Loss of clarity. Loss of approval. Loss of a future that made sense to everyone else. But in that loss, something else emerged. Space. Space to notice my own reactions again. What felt heavy? What felt light? What sparked curiosity instead of obligation? I realized how long it had been since I made a choice without asking how it would look from the outside. That was unsettling. And liberating. Starting over didn't look dramatic. There was no announcement of reinvention. No clean break that could be explained in a sentence. Just a series of quiet refusals. Refusing to keep chasing milestones that felt hollow. Refusing to keep explaining why I should be satisfied. Refusing to silence discomfort just because it was inconvenient. Those refusals cost me. Some people grew distant. Some relationships weakened. Some assumptions collapsed. I felt exposed. Without the borrowed dream, I had to face the question I had avoided for years. Who am I when no one is impressed? That question didn't have an immediate answer. And that was okay. I learned that identity isn't something you find fully formed after you leave the wrong life. It's something you rebuild slowly, through attention. By noticing what drains you. What energizes you. What feels honest even when it's unclear. I stopped needing my life to make sense to others. I needed it to make sense from the inside. That shift changed everything. My days didn't suddenly become exciting. My path didn't become obvious. But I started feeling present. I felt my decisions again, not as evaluations, but as experiences. Some were wrong. Some led nowhere. But they were mine. And that mattered more than perfection. I realized something I wish I had understood earlier. Living someone else's dream doesn't fail immediately. It succeeds, and that's why it's dangerous. It gives you enough reward to stay. Enough validation to ignore the quiet cost. Until one day, you realize you've built a life that works, but doesn't belong to you. I don't regret the years I spent living that dream. They taught me discipline. Endurance. How to commit. But I refuse to let those lessons become a prison. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, hear this carefully. You are allowed to outgrow dreams that once saved you. You are allowed to change direction without proving the old one was wrong. You are allowed to choose a life that feels alive instead of impressive. Leaving a borrowed dream doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally started listening. I didn't destroy my life. I reclaimed authorship over it. And the moment I stopped living someone else's dream, stopped confusing approval with purpose, stopped measuring my worth by borrowed definitions, my life didn't become clearer. But it became honest. And honesty, even when it's uncertain, is the only ground where a life that's truly yours can grow. That's where I stand now. No longer impressive. No longer certain. But finally, present. And that presence is the first thing in my life that feels undeniably, unmistakably mine.